The hallway cameras at Mercy Gate Hospital always glitched at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every night shift guard knew it. Most ignored it. But on Daniel Reyes' third week working the night desk, the monitors didn't just flicker. They showed someone entering the hospital who had been dead for 2 years. When the elevator doors opened in the security feed, Daniel froze. Because walking through the lobby, soaked from the rain, escorted by 2 silent police officers, was his ex-wife Laura, the woman whose funeral he attended, the woman whose body he buried, and she was staring directly into the camera. Mercy Gate Hospital sat on the west side of Chicago, a concrete block of aging brick and glass that looked far more tired at night than it ever did during the day. During daylight hours, it buzzed with activity ambulances, arriving nurses rushing through automatic doors, patients waiting anxiously in the lobby. But after midnight, the building changed. The lights dimmed, the hallways emptied, and the sounds of the city faded into something quieter, something heavier. Daniel Reyes had worked the night security shift there for only 3 weeks. Before that, he had spent 12 years as a Chicago police officer. The job had worn him down slowly, long hours, too many things he couldn't forget, and eventually a moment that pushed him to resign. Night security at a hospital was supposed to be simple. Walk the halls, watch the cameras, check the entrances. Most nights were quiet enough that Daniel spent long stretches staring at the monitor wall in the small security office behind the lobby desk. 32 camera feeds filled the screen's parking garage stairwells, patient corridors, the emergency entrance, and the lobby. It was a routine he had learned quickly. At 12 a.m., the hospital quieted. At 1:30 a.m., the cleaning crew passed through the east wing. At 2:45 a.m., the vending machines in the staff lounge hummed louder than usual. And at 3:17 a.m., something strange happened. Every single night, the monitors flickered. Not dramatically, not like a full blackout. Just a quick distortion like static sliding across the screens for 2 seconds before returning to normal. Daniel noticed it on his second shift. He assumed it was old wiring. Mercy Gate had been built in the late 70s. Half the electronics still looked like they belonged in a museum. When he asked another guard about it during a shift change, the older man just shrugged. "Yeah, cameras glitch around 3:17, the guard said casually. "Been doing that for years." "Maintenance ever check it?" Daniel asked. "They tried. Never found anything." The answer bothered Daniel more than it should have. He was used to explanations. Broken things usually had causes. Loose wires, faulty circuits, human error. But the cameras always glitched at the exact same minute. Never earlier, never later, and always for the same 2 seconds. Still, he pushed the thought aside. The real reason Daniel had taken the job had nothing to do with the hospital itself. It was simply a place where he could work quietly and keep his mind occupied. 2 years earlier, his life had collapsed in ways he still struggled to process. His ex-wife Laura, her accident, the rain, the funeral. Even now, Daniel avoided thinking about it too long. Grief had a way of creeping in when the night was quiet enough. Tonight was one of those nights. Outside the hospital windows, rain tapped against the glass, and the city streets glistened under the dim glow of streetlights. Inside the security room, Daniel leaned back in his chair and sipped cold coffee while scanning the monitors. Parking garage empty, lobby empty, emergency entrance quiet. He glanced at the digital clock mounted above the monitor wall. 3:16 a.m. Daniel barely noticed the time until the screens flickered. Static crawled across the monitors. 2 seconds, just like every other night. But when the images cleared, Daniel leaned forward slowly. Because the front lobby camera no longer showed an empty entrance. The automatic doors were sliding open, and someone was walking inside. Daniel's first thought was that it must be a late-night patient. But the person stepping into the lobby didn't look sick. They looked deliberate, focused, walking directly toward the security desk. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the camera zoomed slightly to adjust its focus. Because the person entering the building had a face he recognized instantly. A face he had spent 2 years trying to forget. Laura Reyes, his ex-wife. And she wasn't alone. 2 Chicago police officers walked beside her. Neither of them were speaking. Neither of them were looking at her. They were both staring directly ahead, and Laura's eyes slowly lifted toward the security camera mounted above the lobby. Straight toward Daniel, like she knew he was watching. Daniel's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. Because Laura had died 2 years ago, he had identified her body himself. Daniel Reyes didn't move for several seconds. The security monitors hummed softly in the dim office, casting pale light across his face, but his body had gone completely still. On the screen, the lobby camera showed Laura standing beneath the fluorescent lights just inside the hospital entrance. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her dark coat onto the polished tile floor. The two Chicago police officers beside her looked perfectly ordinary standard Navy uniforms, badges reflecting the lobby lights, utility belts hanging at their sides. But something about them felt wrong. Not immediately obvious. Just off. Daniel leaned closer to the monitor. The officers weren't speaking to Laura. They weren't speaking to each other. They were simply standing beside her, waiting. The strange part was their stillness. Real officers never stood that rigidly. They shifted, glanced around, checked their radios. These two men didn't move at all. Then Laura took a single step forward. Daniel's heart began pounding harder. Her movements looked natural, but there was something unsettling in the way she walked, slow, measured, almost rehearsed. Like someone remembering how to use a body. She stopped directly beneath the security camera. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring upward. Then her lips moved. The camera had no audio, but Daniel could read the words clearly. Daniel. His name. A cold sensation crept down his spine. He had seen Laura's body at the morgue 2 years earlier. The coroner had lifted the sheet so Daniel could confirm the identity. Her skin had been pale, her hair damp from the accident. There had been a thin bruise along her temple, but it had been her. Without question, Daniel remembered the smell of antiseptic and cold steel in the room. He remembered signing the paperwork. He remembered the funeral 3 days later. Closed casket, rain falling softly over the cemetery. And now she was standing in the hospital lobby, alive. Daniel pushed his chair back suddenly and stood. Okay, what the hell is this? He muttered under his breath. His first instinct was that this had to be some kind of mistake. A look-alike, someone who resembled Laura. But the longer he stared at the monitor, the more certain he became. It was her. The same dark hair falling just below her shoulders. The same narrow scar near her left eyebrow from a bicycle crash years ago. Even the way she tilted her head slightly when she looked up. It was Laura. She raised one hand slowly, not waving, just pointing, directly at the camera, directly at him. Daniel's pulse surged. He quickly grabbed the desk phone and called the front reception station. It rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. Night desk. This is security, Daniel said quickly. Is there anyone in the lobby right now? A pause. Lobby, the nurse replied. No. Why? Daniel stared back at the monitor. Laura and the two officers were still there, standing in plain sight. You're sure? He asked. I'm literally looking at it right now, the nurse said. It's empty. Daniel's throat went dry. He slowly turned back toward the monitor wall. Laura was still staring upward, waiting. The officers beside her still hadn't moved. Not a single shift of posture, not even a blink. Daniel felt the back of his neck prickle. Stay where you are, he told the nurse. Don't go near the lobby yet. Why, she asked. But Daniel had already hung up. He grabbed his radio and stepped into the hallway outside the security room. The hospital felt even quieter than usual tonight. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. A distant heart monitor beeped somewhere down the corridor. Daniel moved quickly toward the lobby. His boots echoed softly against the tile floor. The walk from the security office to the front entrance normally took less than a minute. Tonight it felt longer, much longer. Every corner seemed darker, every shadow slightly deeper. He kept replaying the image in his mind. Laura standing under the camera, mouthing his name. When Daniel reached the final hallway that opened into the lobby, he slowed. The corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. His hand moved instinctively toward the flashlight clipped to his belt. The lobby entrance was just ahead. Bright lights, glass doors, reception desk. Daniel stepped into the open space and stopped immediately. The lobby was empty, completely empty. The automatic doors were closed. Rain continued to fall outside, but there was no Laura. No police officers, no wet footprints on the floor, nothing. Daniel looked around slowly. Hello, he called. His voice echoed faintly through the quiet lobby. No response. He walked cautiously toward the entrance doors and glanced outside. The parking lot was deserted. A few streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. Daniel's breathing had grown shallow. This doesn't make any sense, he whispered. He turned back toward the reception desk. The nurse who had answered the phone earlier was sitting behind the counter typing on a computer. She glanced up when she saw him. You okay? She asked. Daniel hesitated. You didn't see anyone come in here? No, she said. Not even police officers? The nurse frowned. No, why would police be here? Daniel slowly exhaled. He glanced toward the ceiling. The security camera above the lobby entrance stared down silently. Just checking, he said quietly. The nurse gave him a confused look, but Daniel was already walking back toward the security office. His mind raced with explanations. Maybe the feed had glitched. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe the flicker at 3:17 had distorted an old recording. But as he stepped back into the security room and looked at the monitor wall again, his stomach dropped, because the cameras were still recording, and the lobby camera still showed Laura standing there, exactly where she had been before, directly under the lens, still staring upward, still pointing. But this time, the two police officers beside her had moved. They were both looking straight at the camera now, and slowly, very slowly, they began walking toward it. Daniel felt a sharp wave of nausea rise in his stomach. He was standing in the same building the camera was showing. He had just walked through that exact lobby. It had been empty, and yet, on the monitor, Laura and the two police officers were still there. Now they were moving, walking directly toward the security camera mounted above the entrance doors. Daniel's brain struggled to reconcile the two realities. He glanced back toward the hallway leading to the lobby, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just the long, sterile corridor under humming fluorescent lights. Slowly, Daniel stepped closer to the monitor. Laura's face filled more of the frame now as she approached the camera. The two officers walked slightly behind her, their movements unnervingly synchronized. Left step, right step, left step, right step. No casual body language, no conversation, just silent mechanical motion. Then Laura stopped again. The camera zoom adjusted automatically. Daniel's breath caught. Her eyes looked different. The color was right dark brown, just like he remembered. But there was something hollow behind them. Something that didn't belong to a living person. Her mouth moved again. 3 words. Daniel read them clearly. You buried the wrong body. His chest tightened. A sudden cold prickled across his arms. What? He whispered. Before he could react, the screen flickered. The lobby camera cut to static for a second. When the image returned, the lobby was empty again. No Laura. No officers. Just the polished tile floor and silent reception desk. Daniel stood frozen in front of the monitors. His mind replayed the words again. You buried the wrong body. That was impossible. He had seen Laura. He had signed the documents. The coroner had confirmed it. The police report had been clear. Car accident. Vehicle found overturned near the Chicago River. Her body recovered at the scene. Case closed. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. You're losing it, he muttered. Night shifts could do strange things to the mind. Too much silence. Too much time alone with your thoughts. Still, something felt wrong. He reached for the keyboard connected to the security system and began pulling up recorded footage. The hospital stored the last 48 hours of camera recordings. If the lobby camera had shown Laura earlier tonight, it would be saved. Daniel rewound the footage. 3:16 a.m. The lobby was empty. 3:17 a.m. The familiar static flickered across the screens. 2 seconds. Then, the doors opened. Laura walked inside, just like before. The two officers followed. Daniel leaned closer. Okay, you're not imagining this, he whispered. The footage continued. Laura looked directly into the camera. Her lips moved. Then the officers turned their heads toward the lens, toward him. But as Daniel scrubbed forward through the video timeline, something strange happened. At 3:17:21, the footage distorted. The screen rippled like heat waves over asphalt. And then the recording skipped forward to 3:18. The lobby was empty again. No trace of them. Daniel frowned. He replayed the moment again. Same result. The recording simply cut out, like the system refused to store what had happened. That's not possible, he said quietly. The hospital's security system wasn't advanced, but it didn't randomly erase footage, unless something interfered with the recording. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The room suddenly felt colder. Outside rain hammered harder against the windows. He glanced at the clock. 3:24 a.m. 7 minutes had passed since the glitch. Normally, the rest of the shift would be uneventful. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. Daniel stood up again. If the cameras were lying, he needed to confirm things in person. He grabbed his flashlight and radio. I'm doing a sweep, he told the night nurse over the intercom. What happened? She asked. Just checking the entrances, Daniel replied. He stepped back into the hallway. The hospital felt darker now. Not physically darker, the lights were still on. But the shadows seemed deeper, more noticeable. Daniel walked toward the stairwell first. The metal door creaked slightly when he pushed it open. Inside the concrete stairwell smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and damp air. He shined his flashlight down the steps. Nothing. Just empty landings. He closed the door and moved down the corridor toward the emergency wing. The hallway stretched long and quiet. Several patient rooms were occupied, but their doors were closed. Machines beeped faintly behind them. Daniel turned the corner toward the administrative offices and stopped. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. Electrical issues, he muttered, though he didn't believe it. He continued walking. Halfway down the hall, he passed a glass window looking into an unused waiting area. Rows of empty chairs faced a silent television. Daniel's flashlight beam swept across the room. For a brief second, something moved. He froze. The beam returned to the same spot. Nothing, just chairs. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You're on edge," he whispered. But as he turned to leave, the television screen inside the waiting room flickered to life. Daniel turned back. The TV had no sound, but the screen showed security footage. Black and white camera feed. A hospital hallway. Daniel stepped closer to the glass. His stomach tightened. The hallway on the screen looked familiar, because it was the hallway he was standing in. The camera angle was from the ceiling above him, showing Daniel himself, standing there with his flashlight, watching the TV. Daniel's pulse began pounding again. He looked up. There was no camera above him. He looked back at the screen. The footage continued. He watched himself standing still. Then something entered the frame behind him. A woman. Daniel slowly turned his head. The real hallway behind him was empty, but the television screen told a different story. Laura stood behind him, her hair wet, her face pale, watching him. Daniel's throat went dry. He slowly turned back toward the TV. Laura in the footage stepped closer to the version of Daniel on screen. The police officers appeared behind her, one on each side. Their movements were unnatural, too smooth, too synchronized. The Daniel on the television finally turned around. His reaction mirrored the panic Daniel felt now. He stumbled backward, but Laura simply raised one hand again, pointing at him. Then her mouth opened. This time the television had sound. Her voice came through the speakers in a distorted whisper. "Daniel." Daniel's legs felt weak. The whisper continued. "You never looked inside the coffin." The screen suddenly went blank. The waiting room fell silent again. Daniel stood there shaking, because he knew something he hadn't thought about in 2 years. Something he had buried along with Laura. Her funeral had been closed casket, and Daniel had never asked why. Daniel stood motionless in the hallway, the echo of Laura's whisper still vibrating in his ears. "You never looked inside the coffin." The television in the waiting room had already gone dark again, returning to a blank reflective screen. In it, Daniel could see his own pale face staring back at him. But behind his reflection, for a brief moment, he thought he saw movement. He spun around quickly. The hallway behind him was empty, long, silent. But something had changed. The hospital no longer felt like a place where people healed. It felt like something that had been waiting. Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. Think, the coffin, Laura's funeral. He had never questioned the closed casket because the police told him the accident had caused severe trauma. They said it was better if he remembered her the way she was. He had been too numb to argue, too broken to ask questions. Now that memory twisted painfully in his mind. What if the body hadn't been Laura's? What if something had been wrong from the beginning? Daniel shook his head. No, he whispered, but the thought refused to leave. He turned and walked quickly back toward the security office. His footsteps echoed louder now. Too loud. The hospital seemed to amplify every sound. When Daniel reached the office, the monitors were still running. 32 camera feeds glowing in the dim room. He rushed to the keyboard and pulled up archived records from 2 years earlier. If Laura had died in Chicago, the report would be there. He typed quickly, searching hospital intake logs. Nothing. No record of her body ever being processed through Mercy Gate Hospital. That wasn't unusual. Accident victims sometimes went to other facilities. But something else caught his eye. A police intake report attached to the accident file. Daniel opened it. The document described the recovery of a female body from a car wreck near the river. But one detail stood out. Identification confirmed by spouse visual only. Daniel's stomach tightened. That meant the body had never been confirmed through dental records or fingerprints. Just him, just his word. He leaned back slowly in his chair. "What if?" he whispered. The lights in the security room flickered. Once, twice. Then the monitors began glitching again. Static crawled across the screens. But this time it wasn't just one camera. Every monitor in the room distorted simultaneously. Daniel watched as the feeds shifted. Parking garage, hallways, emergency room. One by one they all changed, until every single screen displayed the hospital lobby camera. 32 identical views, and Laura standing beneath the camera again. Daniel's breathing stopped. She wasn't alone anymore. The two police officers stood beside her again, but now there were more figures behind them. At least a dozen, shadowy shapes filling the entrance hallway behind Laura. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They were simply standing there, watching the camera, watching him. Laura slowly stepped forward again. The monitors adjusted their focus simultaneously. Her face filled every screen. Daniel saw every detail now. Her skin looked pale, too pale. Her lips slightly blue, and her eyes. They looked like someone wearing Laura's face, something hollow staring from behind it. Her mouth opened again, but this time Daniel could hear her. Her voice echoed softly from the monitor speakers. "Daniel, you left me there." His chest tightened. "I buried you," he whispered. Laura tilted her head. "Number." Her voice sounded calm, almost gentle. "You buried someone else." The shadowy figures behind her shifted slightly, their shapes distorted in the dim light. Daniel realized something horrifying. They weren't police. They were wearing police uniforms, but their faces were wrong. Too still, too blank, like mannequins dressed as officers. Laura raised one hand again, pointing directly at him. "Come see," she said. The monitors flickered violently. Then the image changed. The screens no longer showed the lobby. They showed a dark basement hallway, concrete walls, flickering lights. Daniel recognized it instantly. The hospital's lower storage level, a place rarely used anymore. The camera slowly zoomed toward a door at the end of the basement corridor. The door was labeled Morgue, Storage, Closed. Daniel's heart pounded violently now. He knew that area had been sealed years ago. Flood damage, structural issues. The hospital never repaired it. No one went down there anymore. But the camera feed showed the door slowly opening. Darkness waited inside. And from the darkness, Laura stepped out. Wet footprints appeared on the floor behind her. Her eyes lifted toward the camera again. Toward Daniel. Her voice whispered through the speakers. "You left me in the water." Daniel staggered backward. Memory slammed into him suddenly. The accident. Laura's car had crashed near the river. But Daniel had never seen the crash site. The police had handled everything. He had simply identified the body later. But what if Laura had never been recovered? What if she had still been out there, in the river, cold, alone? The monitors flickered again. Then every screen went black. The security room fell completely silent. Daniel stood there shaking, and then his radio crackled. The night nurse's voice came through. "Security." Daniel grabbed the radio. "Yes." Her voice trembled. "Daniel, there are police officers here." His stomach dropped. "They're asking for you." Daniel slowly turned toward the monitor wall. The cameras had come back online. The lobby feed showed Laura standing there again. Two police officers beside her, and this time, they were knocking on the hospital doors. The nurse's voice whispered over the radio. "They say, your ex-wife filed a missing person report." Daniel's hands began shaking violently, because Laura Reyes had been officially declared dead 2 years ago. And now the police were here, saying she was missing. For several long seconds, Daniel Reyes couldn't move. The nurse's words echoed through the static of the radio. "Your ex-wife filed a missing person report." It made no sense. Laura had died. There had been paperwork, police reports, a funeral, a grave. Daniel forced himself to breathe. "Where are they now?" he asked quietly. In the lobby, the nurse replied. "They asked if you're working tonight." Daniel looked at the monitors again. The lobby camera showed 2 Chicago police officers standing just inside the entrance doors. Real ones this time. They were shaking rain off their jackets and speaking with the receptionist. Laura was not with them. The shadowy figures were gone. Everything looked normal. Daniel's pulse slowed slightly. Maybe the earlier footage had been a glitch. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on him. Maybe his mind had filled in details that weren't real. But the feeling in his chest refused to settle. He stepped out of the security room and walked toward the lobby again. The hallway lights no longer flickered. The hospital felt normal again. Just a quiet building at 4 in the morning. When Daniel entered the lobby, the 2 officers turned toward him. One of them was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. The other looked younger, maybe mid-30s. "Daniel Reyes," the older officer asked. "That's me." The officer nodded. "I'm Detective Harper. This is Officer Malik." They shook hands briefly. "We're sorry to bother you during your shift," Harper said, "but we had a report connected to your name." Daniel forced a calm expression. "What kind of report?" The detective studied him for a moment. "Your ex-wife," Harper said. "Laura Reyes." Daniel's stomach tightened again. "What about her?" The younger officer pulled out a small notebook. "We received a call earlier tonight," he said. "About 2 hours ago. A woman reported she'd been missing for 2 years." Daniel stared at him. "Missing," Harper nodded slowly. The caller claimed to be Laura Reyes. Silence settled between them. The rain outside tapped softly against the hospital glass doors. Daniel's voice came out hoarse. "That's impossible." "That's what we thought too," Harper replied calmly. "So we checked the file." He opened a folder and pulled out a document. The body from that car accident 2 years ago was never confirmed through dental records. Daniel felt a cold wave pass through him. Harper continued, "Your identification was the only confirmation. The remains were too damaged to verify further." Daniel's throat tightened. "So you're saying," he whispered. "We're saying," Harper said gently, "that it's possible your ex-wife was never actually identified." The younger officer stepped forward. "And tonight, someone claiming to be Laura Reyes called 911 from a payphone near the river." Daniel felt the room tilt slightly. "What did she say?" Malik hesitated, then answered quietly. "She said her husband buried the wrong woman." Daniel's blood turned cold, because those were the exact words Laura had mouthed on the security monitor earlier. "You buried the wrong body." Detective Harper slid a photograph across the reception desk. It showed a grainy security camera still from the payphone location. A woman standing under a streetlight. Long dark hair, thin coat, face partially visible. Daniel stared at the picture. It was Laura, or someone who looked exactly like her. Harper watched his reaction carefully. "We'd like you to come down to the station later today to answer a few questions," the detective said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay." The officers thanked him and stepped back toward the doors. "Try to get some rest after your shift," Harper added. Then they left. The automatic doors closed behind them. The lobby fell quiet again. Daniel stood there for a long moment, then slowly turned back toward the hallway leading to the security office, because deep down, he already knew something was still wrong, and the worst part hadn't happened yet. As Daniel stepped back into the security room, the monitors flickered again. But this time, it wasn't 3:17 a.m. The clock on the wall read 4:02, and every screen showed the same image. Laura standing in the hospital basement, beside a metal morgue drawer, her hand resting on the handle, waiting for him to open it. Daniel Reyes stared at the monitor wall as if the room itself had stopped breathing. 32 screens, 32 identical images, the hospital basement corridor, concrete walls, a flickering fluorescent light humming weakly above a rusted metal door, and Laura standing beside the morgue drawer. Her hand rested on the handle like someone calmly waiting for permission. Daniel slowly looked up at the clock again. 4:02 a.m. The cameras were not supposed to glitch at this time. Only 3:17 a.m. But the footage was clear. No distortion, no static. Just Laura, watching the camera, watching him. Daniel's mouth felt dry. He knew that basement level had been sealed years ago. Flood damage had forced the hospital to shut down the old morgue. The lower storage corridors had never been reopened. There were no working cameras down there, no electrical service, no reason for anyone to be standing in that hallway, and yet the monitors were showing it perfectly. Laura lifted her eyes slowly. Her lips moved again. This time, the speakers in the security room carried her voice clearly, soft, almost tired. "Daniel, it's cold down here." The words sent a sharp chill through his chest. Daniel grabbed the radio instinctively. "Reception," he said quickly. The nurse answered. "Yeah. Is anyone in the basement?" A pause. "No, that floor's locked. Why?" Daniel looked back at the monitors. Laura hadn't moved. Still waiting beside the morgue drawer, still looking at the camera. "Just checking," Daniel whispered. He set the radio down slowly. There were only two explanations now. Either someone had broken into the sealed basement, or something was showing him something that shouldn't exist. Daniel hesitated for several seconds, then grabbed his flashlight. If the monitors were showing a real location, he had to see it. He left the security office and walked toward the stairwell. The hospital felt unnaturally quiet again. Even the distant machines had gone silent. The stairwell door creaked open. Cold air drifted upward from the lower levels. Daniel began descending. Level 1, Level B, then finally the bottom landing. A heavy metal door stood in front of him. The faded sign above it read, "Morgue Storage Closed." The lock on the door looked rusted, untouched for years. Daniel raised his flashlight and shined it through the small window. Darkness. He pushed the handle. The door slowly creaked open. The smell hit him immediately. Not rot, not decay, just damp concrete and stale air. Daniel stepped inside cautiously. The corridor looked exactly like the one on the monitors. Long, empty, flickering overhead lights, and at the far end, a metal morgue drawer. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He walked slowly toward it. Each step echoed across the concrete floor. When he reached the drawer, he stopped. Laura wasn't there. The hallway was empty, but the drawer was slightly open. Just a few inches. Daniel hesitated. His hand trembled slightly as he grabbed the handle. For a moment, he considered walking away, calling the police, letting someone else deal with whatever this was. But curiosity and dread had already rooted themselves too deeply. Daniel pulled the drawer open. The metal rails screeched softly. Inside, a body lay under a thin white sheet. Daniel's breath slowed. The body was small, a woman, dark hair. He reached forward slowly and lifted the sheet, and froze, because the face staring up at him was not Laura. It was someone he had never seen before. A woman maybe in her 30s, pale, still, dead for a long time. Daniel's mind raced. If this woman had been buried under Laura's name, then Laura had never been in that coffin, which meant she had never been confirmed dead, which meant the police tonight might be right. Laura might still be alive. Daniel slowly lowered the sheet again. His heartbeat finally began to slow. Maybe everything tonight had just been coincidence. A strange series of misunderstandings. Maybe the body mix-up had caused confusion years ago. Maybe Laura had disappeared after the accident and resurfaced now. Maybe. Daniel's thoughts stopped. Because when he turned around, Laura was standing in the hallway behind him, her hair still wet, her coat dripping water onto the concrete floor, her eyes calm. Daniel's voice barely came out. "Laura." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked past him, toward the open morgue drawer, then back at Daniel. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and she whispered something so softly it barely carried through the hallway. "Daniel, that's not the body you buried." The lights above them flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Daniel reached for his flashlight again, but before he could turn it on, he heard something inside the morgue drawer behind him. A slow movement, like fingers sliding against metal, and a woman's voice whispered from inside the drawer. "Daniel, why did you leave me there?"